I would, I didn't keep a journal back then, so I can't really trace the beginnings of any of the early stories, which now I do keep a journal. But I think mostly what I was looking at with the character of Mary Russell is if you have a mind, and a mind is a sort of gender non-specific thing, what would that mind of the great detective look like if it were in a woman instead? How would it be different, and how would it be the same thing? So also because it's more interesting to watch someone develop and be shaped over a period of time, I thought it was better to start her young. So she's 15 when you first meet her.
And how old is Holmes?
With her nose in a book as she walks the Sussex Downs. Holmes, I think he's in his mid-50s.
And there was a reason for this, right? I mean, a specific literary reason for him being that old.
It's the Conan Doyle stories are very, very general, and they don't tend to give a lot of detail about his early life. But one of the stories it does is, I'm going blank on it, The Gloria Scott, where it's one of Holmes's earlier cases, and he gives a certain amount of chronology with a man who goes off to the goldfields in Australia. So what I did was take a pencil, and every time there would be a year mentioned, I'd write that down. And then there's the man would say, you know, we worked for some months here, and so I'd write that down. And I came up with a birth date that was about 10 years different from what the usual Sherlockians go by. So it very conveniently made Holmes into, you know, still an extremely vigorous retired man rather than an old and tired retired man.
Absolutely true. But what I was actually, and I didn't say this right, what I was actually thinking about, because I've heard you talk about this many times, is the fact that you wanted to start Holmes when Doyle had let go of him.
Yeah, yeah. When the last of the Conan Doyle stories is the latest set by internal date, is on the very eve of the First World War, the Great War.
Right.
His last bow is set as the cold winds of Europe are coming in and about to plunge the country into what everyone knew was coming. Although that story was written somewhat after that, it refers to Holmes. But all of the stories that are written after that and published after that, and they published Holmes stories on into the 20s, are all set back in the Baker Street days. So they're all moved back before the war, which, of course, from Conan Doyle's point of view, was necessary because his Holmes wouldn't have survived the First War. I mean, he would not fit in the England after the First War. And if I had tried to write Holmes pastiches with the same character and set him in 1920, they wouldn't have worked. But because Conan Doyle finishes with him in 1914, I can pick him up the following spring and allow him to develop as a person and as a character separate from what Conan Doyle was forced to do with him.
So he's no longer living in Baker Street. Watson is no longer, you know, his roommate.
Right. Well, I think that at some point he refers to Holmes's retirement long before the war. He retires to keep bees on the Sussex Downs.
I think so. I always thought it sort of coincided with the death of Edward the Seventh, but
yeah,
which was 1910.
Mm-hmm. I think it may even have been before that. But anyway, he was firmly retired by 1914, except when the War Office called him back. You know. So.
And there's the title, The Beekeeper's Apprentice.
Yeah. Yeah. Which she becomes his apprentice in things other than keeping bees.
Although you didn't really start it out to go that way, did you?
Didn't I?
No.
Oh,
well,
dear.
no. You started. I'm sorry. You started her out to be his apprentice, but you didn't initially have in mind for them to become a couple, did you?
Oh, I think I must have.
Do you?
I think, yeah. Looking at, and I don't tend to reread my stuff very much, but I think reading The Beekeeper's Apprentice, the kind of electricity between those two characters could not be mistaken. Really, it couldn't.
Okay.
And, you know, the fact that she's only 15 when you first meet her, by the end of the book she's 18, and the electricity, I believe, is fairly clear. So that I must have had that intention from the very beginning. And really, if you're talking about books set in the teens and 20s, the only way you could have a very close partnership between a man and a woman would be if they were partners in every sense of the word. I mean, you couldn't very well go off for 3 weeks to Europe or, you know, 6 weeks to Palestine without an awful lot of tongues flapping.
Or a chaperone. No, that's very true. Well, anyway, we have Mary. Oh, and I meant to point out, it's lying flat on the table, but The Beekeeper's Apprentice has just been reissued in a gorgeous new trade paperback edition.
Yeah.
With much nicer artwork, I think.
Yeah.
Much, very evocative. But tell me the story of the bee on the cover, because there is a little bee.
Well, I get my covers from Bantam, usually when they're already pretty far along. And although in theory, if I really, really hated them, they would change them. In practice, it would be a real problem. However, they sent me this mock-up of this copy. And I wrote back and said, you know, I like the contrast between the lettering and the light gray background is very nice. And it's, however, do you think that we could possibly use an actual bee as the insect? Because otherwise I'm going to get letters and people asking me at various talks, and why did you put this insect on the cover that's not a bee? And, you know, I love to get letters from fans, but when you get 20 or 30 on the same thing, that maybe you think maybe we should have changed this before. So she sends, my editor sends the information on to the art department, and the art department responds, this is a bee. And I respond, this is not a bee. And they respond, this is a bee. And then they send me as an attachment the actual picture that they were working off of. They downloaded a picture of a bee from, I don't know, but
apiary.com or something.
no, it was one of these services that'll give you a picture of anything from a pencil to Mount Everest. And so, however, the insect that they had labeled as bee is not a bee. So, you know, the sorts of things that a writer has to do are just really sometimes quite ridiculous. I go out the next morning and I go to my local bookstore and I buy 3 books, children's books on bees, with pictures, nice big pictures, clear pictures of bees. And I Xerox them, and I blow them up, and I take their printed off attachment, and I write on it, eyes are too small. The antenna is, you know, this way instead of this way. The wings point, the body goes, and I found a picture in an insect book of what they're looking at, and it's a hoverfly, which does indeed look like a bee. I mean, when it's flying around in the garden, you'd think it was a bee, except they have a different flight habit. But so
you really got into this.
And I'm thinking of this, you know, this is just so ridiculous. I just Xeroxing, you know, $30 worth of Xerox and overnighting it to New York. And I said, you know, this is a hoverfly. And so they said, okay, this is a hoverfly. So then Kate sends me a remake of the book that says that the sales department thought that, you know, along with the new cover, maybe they should have a change in title, and it says The Hoverfly's Apprentice.
Took all the magic out, didn't it?
So you know, so I got the original hoverfly removed. However, I have to say that the insect on there is still not a honeybee, it's a bumblebee. So don't blame me for it. You know, I'm sorry. I really do try.
This is a very hot area with authors oftentimes is the cover art.
Sorry to get you so involved in this silly story. But
not at all. I really enjoyed it. I knew there was a story there, as a matter of fact. This is the kind of thing that when you write your memoir, you know, you can go on for pages, etc.
Yes.
But anyway, I do think it's very handsome, and I noticed that Folly is coming out as a trade paperback.
Yeah.
And the reason I say that is that this is kind of a current publishing signal that this is a more literary book. Mass market books are still considered, you know, to be, they're the more common, you know, for the larger audience.
Polloi, yes.
Yeah, and the trade paperback has become a little bit of a signal. It's actually really about money. You make more money on trade paperbacks and print fewer copies. Well, trust me on this, as a publisher, I can tell you that.